When we face the pain of loss, there is a deep and natural inclination to retreat inward, to shut ourselves off from the world and from the very source of life itself. In the depths of mourning, we might even begin to question the meaning of it all. Why must there be pain? Why does life require us to walk through such dark valleys? But what if, rather than closing ourselves off, we are invited by God to embrace our grief, to surrender it to Him, and in doing so, open ourselves to healing? It is in moments of darkness that we are most likely to discover a light we had not noticed before. This light is not always immediate or overpowering, but it is present nonetheless. When we feel that everything is slipping away, we can remember that God does not leave us to wander alone. His presence is especially near to the brokenhearted. During the 40 days following the passing of a loved one, we are given a unique opportunity to reflect, to mourn with faith, and to allow our grief to be transformed into a deeper reliance on God's grace. This journey is not one of mere survival. It is a path of spiritual renewal if we choose to walk it with Him. Perhaps you have heard the words of Jesus, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." Matthew 5, verse 4. These words might seem difficult to comprehend in the midst of sorrow. How can mourning bring blessing? How can there be comfort when everything feels broken? It is precisely in the place of mourning that the blessing begins to root, not because the pain is lessened immediately, but because God promises to be with us in the pain. He does not call us to rush through our sorrow, but to allow it to become an offering, an opportunity to experience His presence more deeply. Do we trust in the process of healing, even when we do not see immediate results? Are we willing to wait, to surrender our grief, and allow God to transform it into something new? It is often in the quiet moments of prayer that this transformation can begin. St. Augustine, one of the most profound spiritual writers in the history of the Church, shared his own experience of mourning after the death of his beloved mother. He was struck by the deep sorrow that gripped his heart, but it was in prayer that he began to find solace. He did not rush his grief. He did not pretend that everything was fine. Instead, he poured out his heart to God, trusting that God could hold his pain. Over time, he began to understand that his sorrow was not something to be feared or avoided, but something that could bring him closer to God. My soul was weary with sorrow, but God's comfort came as a balm to my spirit. In the 40 days following the passing of a loved one, it is essential to give ourselves permission to mourn, to grieve without shame or haste. This is not a time for pretending that we are fine when we are not. We do not need to hide our feelings, nor should we try to rush through them in an attempt to move on too quickly. Rather, we are called to trust God with our sorrow, to bring it before Him in prayer. A simple prayer like, "Lord, help me in this time of sorrow. Grant peace to my heart and to the soul of. Let your light shine through this darkness," can serve as a source of healing. This prayer can be repeated throughout the day, allowing it to become a small beacon of hope in the midst of grief. When we commit ourselves to prayer during this time, we are not just talking to God, we are allowing Him to talk to us, to speak words of comfort into our hearts. We are making space for Him to begin His work of healing. And while the process may take time, we trust that God will meet us in our sorrow, as He promised. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34, verse 18. The key to this journey is patience. We do not control the timing of our healing, but we can control how we approach it. When we lean on God's strength, even in the darkest days, we are given the assurance that He is with us, that He will never leave us. It may not always feel that way in the moment, but we are called to trust that God's timing is perfect, even when it seems that the healing is slow or imperceptible. As you reflect on these words, I invite you to think.
What would it look like for you to open yourself to God's healing during this time of mourning? How might you practice surrendering your grief to Him, trusting that He will bring peace in His time? If you find yourself struggling, remember that you are not alone. God walks with you in every step of this journey. He will bring comfort to your soul as you allow Him to. Take heart, for though the journey may be long, the promise of healing is sure.
John turned to prayer. So too can we, knowing that in our weakest moments, God's grace is sufficient. This brings us to the question, how often do we, in the midst of our sorrow, forget that prayer is not a mere ritual, but an invitation to encounter God's presence? It is easy to think that our grief is too heavy or too complicated for prayer. We might feel that we need to have the right words, or that our feelings of sorrow are too much to bring before God. But remember, Jesus Himself said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. He does not ask us to be perfect or to have everything figured out before we approach Him. Rather, He invites us to bring all of our burdens, our sadness, our frustration, our confusion, and lay them at His feet. Consider how often we may avoid this invitation, thinking that our pain somehow disqualifies us from receiving God's comfort. But the very nature of God is to draw near to us in our sorrow, to meet us where we are. This is why prayer, even in its simplest form, is so powerful. A prayer as simple as, "Lord, help me to find peace in this time of sorrow," can open the door to divine comfort. It allows God to begin His work of healing in our hearts, even when we do not fully understand how it is happening. The story of St. John Chrysostom reminds us that prayer is not just a way to seek comfort, it is a way to actively invite God into the most painful places of our lives. And this prayer is not always about asking for the removal of pain, but for the strength to endure it with faith. We do not need to understand everything about our grief in order to bring it to God. In fact, it is often in the act of surrendering our sorrow to Him that we find the greatest peace. The Bible is filled with promises of God's nearness to those who mourn. The psalmist writes, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit." Psalm 34:18. This is not a distant or abstract promise, but one that reaches into the deepest places of our hearts. It is a reminder that God's love is not contingent on our circumstances. Even when we feel far from Him, He remains near, ready to offer His comfort. But we must be open to receiving that comfort through prayer, through trusting that He is working in us, even when we cannot see or feel it. And so we must ask ourselves, do we allow ourselves the space to grieve in the presence of God? Do we trust that He is near to us even when our hearts feel broken? Or do we, in our impatience, seek to escape the pain rather than allowing it to lead us closer to Him? Prayer is a gentle reminder that we are not alone. As we continue through this time of mourning, let us be intentional about turning to God, offering our sorrow, and allowing His love to work within us. The more we surrender our grief, the more we open ourselves to the transformative power of His comfort.
It is in these moments of surrender that we may find the peace we long for, even in the midst of pain. Let this be the foundation of your journey during these 40 days, an invitation to come to God in prayer, just as you are, with all your grief and all your questions. May your prayer be the key that opens the door to His presence, and may you find in His embrace the comfort and healing you need to move forward. In moments of profound loss, when the weight of grief feels unbearable, we may struggle to see a way forward. The pain of losing someone we love can seem endless, as if the heart will never heal. Yet it is precisely in these moments of brokenness that we are called to discover a deeper, more enduring peace, one that transcends our understanding and allows us to move through grief with grace. One of the greatest tools in this spiritual journey is prayer, but not just any prayer, prayer that comes from the depths of the soul, a prayer that surrenders our deepest pain and trustingly places it in God's hands. This prayer is not a mere recitation of words. It is an offering, a sacrament of the heart. When we pray in times of mourning, we are not simply seeking to change our circumstances. We are allowing God to enter into our suffering, to be present with us in ways that heal and restore. Consider the prayer of Saint Teresa of Avila, a woman who knew deep sorrow and loss throughout her life. Saint Teresa, in the midst of personal trials and loss, prayed, "Let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. All things are passing. God is unchanging. Patience obtains all. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone suffices." This prayer reveals a profound trust in God's unchanging nature, a trust that transcends the fleeting nature of human suffering. Saint Teresa's prayer teaches us that in times of mourning, we can find comfort not in the removal of our pain, but in the presence of God who remains constant and faithful through all things. In the Bible, we are reminded of God's constant presence in our grief. The psalmist writes, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." In these words, we find the assurance that God does not leave us in our sorrow. He is near, and His comfort is available to all who grieve. The question we must ask ourselves is, are we willing to trust in God's presence, even when it seems as though He is silent?
Are we willing to bring our sorrow to Him in prayer, allowing Him to meet us in our pain? The act of prayer, especially in times of mourning, is a way of opening our hearts to God's healing work. It is an invitation for God to transform our grief into something holy, something that brings us closer to Him. But how often do we resist this invitation? How often do we allow our grief to drive us away from God rather than toward Him? Prayer does not guarantee that our pain will disappear, but it opens the door to divine comfort, to the peace that only God can provide. As you reflect on this, I invite you to consider a simple yet powerful prayer. Lord, help me in this time of sorrow. I bring my grief before you. Help me to feel your presence, to trust in your love, and to find peace in your embrace. This prayer, repeated each day, can become a source of strength as you move through the days of mourning. It does not need to be long or complicated. What matters is the intention behind it, the surrender of your heart to God's will. St. John of the Cross, another great saint who endured profound suffering, wrote about the dark night of the soul. In this state of suffering, he described a sense of spiritual dryness where God seemed distant. Yet, St. John also teaches that it is in these moments of spiritual aridity that we can experience the deepest union with God. Our souls, he wrote, are like gold refined in the fire. The process of mourning, though painful, is a time of purification where God is shaping us into something more beautiful and refined. The spiritual truth can be difficult to embrace, especially in the midst of deep sorrow. We may not feel like we are being refined. We may only feel the weight of our loss. But it is in these moments that we are called to trust that God is at work within us, even when we cannot see or feel His presence. It is in prayer that we begin to recognize the work He is doing, bringing peace where there was once pain, healing where there was once brokenness. The act of prayer then becomes an essential part of the healing process. It is through prayer that we open ourselves to the possibility of transformation, of allowing our grief to become an offering of trust to God.
And though this transformation may not happen immediately, we trust that God is at work within us. He is healing our hearts, one prayer at a time. As you continue through this period of mourning, I encourage you to lean into prayer as a means of healing. In each prayer, no matter how small, offer your sorrow to God. Trust that, just as St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross discovered, God is with you in your pain. And through your prayer, He will bring about healing that you may not fully understand now, but that will lead you closer to Him in the end. May you find peace in the knowledge that God is near to the brokenhearted and that He is working in your soul, even in this moment of grief.
Let your prayer be the key that unlocks the door to His comforting presence. In the midst of our grief, it is easy to feel as though we are abandoned, as though the world has lost its meaning and the future holds only more darkness. Yet it is precisely in this space, this painful, disorienting space, that the Scriptures offer us words of profound comfort and hope. Jesus, in His compassion, knows the depth of our pain and speaks to us in these moments. He assures us that even in our mourning, there is a promise of blessing and comfort. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." These words are not a distant, theoretical truth. They are a living promise that God offers to each of us as we walk through the valley of grief. But what does it mean to be comforted in mourning? Does it mean that the pain will go away immediately? Does it promise that the wound will heal quickly? No, the comfort that Jesus offers is not an instant removal of pain. Rather, it is a deep, abiding presence, God's nearness to us in our sorrow. When we mourn, we are not abandoned by God. On the contrary, He is closest to us during our moments of brokenness. In this, we can find peace. God does not leave us in our suffering, but instead walks alongside us, offering His healing touch in ways that we often cannot immediately perceive. The story of Saint Monica, the mother of Saint Augustine, offers us an example of how God's comfort can manifest even in the most difficult of circumstances. Saint Monica faced many years of heartache as she prayed tirelessly for the conversion of her son, who was living a life far from God. Despite her fervent prayers, she saw little change in his life. Her heart was heavy with sorrow, not just for his spiritual state, but for the personal struggles she faced in her own life. Yet through all her suffering, Saint Monica did not lose faith in God's promises. She continued to pray, placing her grief in God's hands. In time, her son Saint Augustine experienced a profound conversion, and the mother's prayers were answered in ways she had never imagined. The comfort she received was not a quick solution to her pain, but a deep trust in God's plan, which unfolded in His perfect timing. When we reflect on Saint Monica's story, we are reminded that comfort does not always come immediately. It is not the absence of pain, but the presence of God in the midst of it. The comfort Jesus offers us is the quiet assurance that He is with us, that He will not abandon us, even when we feel alone. This is the essence of the comfort spoken of in Matthew 5:4. It is not an escape from grief, but an invitation to experience God's nearness in a way that only mourning can bring. In times of sorrow, it can be difficult to feel this comfort. We may wonder where God is, why He allows such pain, or whether He even sees our suffering. But the Scriptures remind us time and again that God is close to the brokenhearted.
Psalm 34:18 reassures us, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit." These words are not a hollow promise. They are a reality that we can cling to in our darkest moments. God does not leave us in our pain. He enters it with us, offering us His peace in the midst of it. This leads us to a question that often arises in times of grief. How can we begin to open ourselves to this comfort when the pain feels so overwhelming? How can we trust in God's presence when all we can see is the darkness of our loss? The answer lies in our willingness to surrender our grief to Him. This does not mean denying our pain or pretending that everything is okay when it is not. It means bringing our sorrow before God in prayer, allowing ourselves to feel the weight of our grief and trusting that He will meet us there. A simple but profound prayer during this time could be, "Lord, I am brokenhearted. I feel the weight of this loss, and I do not know how to bear it. But I trust that you are near, that you are with me in this sorrow. I surrender my grief to you, knowing that you will bring comfort in your perfect time." This prayer is not a magical incantation that will immediately take away the pain, but it is an opening of the heart to God's presence. It is a declaration that even in the midst of our deepest sorrow, we choose to trust in God's love and His promises. In the life of Saint Francis of Assisi, we see another example of finding God's comfort in the midst of sorrow. Saint Francis, after suffering from a prolonged illness, experienced a deep spiritual darkness. Yet, even in the midst of his own suffering, he found comfort in God's presence. Saint Francis is known for his words of peace. "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace." These words reflect a deep understanding that God's comfort comes not by removing the pain, but by being present in it, transforming it, and allowing it to become an instrument of His peace. It is in this way that God can take our sorrow and turn it into something holy. When we surrender our grief to Him, when we trust in His promises, He is able to bring about healing in ways we cannot predict. It is through this process that our mourning can become a pathway to deeper faith and deeper intimacy with God. As you continue through this period of mourning, I encourage you to hold on to the promise that God is near to you. His comfort is not a fleeting or superficial consolation, but a deep, abiding peace that will sustain you through the darkest days. May you find comfort in His presence, and may His love heal the wounds of your heart. And as you trust in His perfect timing, may you come to know the truth of His promise. "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." As we near the end of this period of mourning, it is natural to wonder, what is the final purpose of this time? Why must we endure the weight of sorrow for so long? And how do we know when healing is beginning?
The process of mourning is not linear, nor is it easily understood. Yet within the Church's teachings, we are given guidance that can help us navigate these questions with a spirit of faith, patience, and trust in God's perfect plan. One of the most profound spiritual truths that we can reflect upon in this time of mourning is the idea that suffering, when offered up to God, becomes a form of transformation. St. Paul writes in his letter to the Romans, "We also rejoice in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope." This passage reveals a powerful truth. Our suffering is not wasted. It has the potential to produce something beautiful within us: perseverance, character, and ultimately, hope. This hope is not a fleeting wish or a naive optimism, but a deep, rooted expectation that God is at work in our lives, even in the midst of pain. When we are able to view our grief in this light, it shifts the focus from our own suffering to what God might be doing in and through us. Our mourning is no longer just an isolated experience of pain, but a spiritual process through which we can grow in faith.
This is what the Church teaches when it speaks of the redemptive value of suffering. Just as Jesus' suffering on the cross was redemptive for humanity, so too can our suffering be a means by which we grow closer to God and become instruments of His healing grace. The story of Saint Thérèse of Lisieux provides us with a beautiful example of how God can transform suffering into something holy. Saint Thérèse, known as the Little Flower, experienced great personal suffering throughout her life, from illness to spiritual trials. Yet she embraced these sufferings with profound faith, believing that each moment of pain was an opportunity to offer herself more fully to God. She wrote, "I choose all, and I love all, that I may be conformed to the will of God." In her final years, as she struggled with tuberculosis, Saint Thérèse never lost her deep sense of peace. She recognized that her suffering was not something to be feared or avoided, but something to be embraced as a way to participate in the mystery of Christ's suffering. This example from Saint Thérèse teaches us that our grief, while painful, can be a means of deepening our relationship with God. Rather than resisting the pain, we are invited to unite our suffering with the suffering of Christ. In doing so, our grief is no longer meaningless, but part of a larger redemptive story. Our mourning can become an offering to God, a prayer that opens us up to His grace. But how do we actively engage in this process of offering our suffering? One powerful way is through the practice of surrender. When we surrender our grief to God, we're acknowledging that we cannot carry this burden alone. We are placing it in His hands, trusting that He knows what is best for us.
A simple yet profound prayer that can help us surrender our pain is, "Lord, I give you my sorrow. I trust that you will use it for good. Help me to see my suffering through your eyes, and grant me the strength to endure with faith." Surrendering our grief does not mean that we stop feeling the pain, but rather that we place it in God's hands, trusting that He will carry it with us. In the act of surrender, we begin to shift our focus from the burden of grief to the presence of God in our midst. We trust that, though the pain may still be present, God is working within us, refining us, and transforming us into something more beautiful than we were before. This process of transformation can also be understood through the lens of the resurrection. Just as Christ's death on the cross led to the glory of the resurrection, so too can our suffering lead to spiritual renewal. This is the deep hope that the Christian faith offers, that our mourning is not the end of the story. In time, God will bring resurrection to our hearts. The pain we feel now will give way to peace, to joy, to new life. But we must be patient, trusting that God's timing is perfect. In moments of doubt, it can be helpful to reflect on the words of St. Augustine. God is always trying to give good things to us, but our hands are too full to receive them. Often, in our grief, we are so consumed with the weight of our sorrow that we cannot see the gifts that God is offering us. But as we surrender our grief, we begin to open our hands and our hearts to receive the healing that God longs to give us. In this final stretch of mourning, I encourage you to keep your eyes fixed on the promise of resurrection. While your grief is real and valid, it is not the final word. God is with you in this pain, and He is working within you to bring about new life. Through prayer, through surrender, and through trust in God's perfect plan, your mourning will lead to greater hope, greater faith, and a deeper union with Him. As you continue to walk through this time, know that God's grace is available to you. His healing is not distant or abstract. It is a living reality, unfolding in your heart and soul.
And as you allow Him to transform your grief, may you find the peace that surpasses understanding, knowing that your mourning is not without purpose, and that God is at work, even in the midst of your pain.